Hello everyone, welcome, good evening. I don't know about you, but it's a little warm where I am. So I do apologise for any sweaty brows we might have. But what I would say is that we have actually picked the perfect lineup of wines for a warm evening like tonight. So well planned us, Catherine.
Absolutely, it's very refreshing.
Welcome everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to be sharing my Friday evening with you all, enjoying some wine and sushi as part of our Friday night takeaway series. Catherine and I love doing these events. There's nothing better than good wine and good food, and it's a little extra treat for us to share our Fridays with you. So welcome everyone. If you are new to joining us and these events, very casual on our Friday night takeaways. So please do use the chat to let us know where you are, what you're drinking, and in particular, we want to know about the pairings. Oh, Catherine's just telling me my video and sound are a bit twangy. So good word, Catherine. Bear with me. I'm just going to try and swap over my internet. Hopefully that's a bit better. Is that better, Catherine?
It looks like it's coming a bit clearer. You're just ever slightly blurred, but it might be the heat. But
it might be the heat.
the sound is good. So, but members, let us know if you have any problems. But
let's crack on. Hopefully that's resolved it. I've swapped my internet, so fingers crossed. So yes, please let us know where you are, what you're drinking, and what you think of the pairings by using the chat function. And you can also ask us questions. You can put them in the Q&A, but this is a very casual evening tonight, so we don't mind you popping them in the chat, and we'll try and answer things as we go along. We have 6 wines to pair. Now, most of you will have 4, so please don't worry. We had 2 of our wines during the course of putting the event live actually sold out. So I'll be tasting all of them, lucky me, but please note, particularly with the Shannons, because they are both very similar, just note which one you're drinking. And yes, I think without further digging in, Catherine's had a busy week this week, Wine Society members, so she's very pleased that her dinner's been sorted out for her. Right, without further ado, I'm going to start with the first pairing. I'm just going to mention as well that we're not doing the Shannon second. So I did send everyone a list of the order, but just be aware we're going for the Alberino and the Loire Shannon first, and I'll present those. And then Catherine will be doing the Rosé and the Fino Sherry afterwards. So that's the order we'll taste in, but you will be guided through, as always, by us. So let's start with the Society's exhibition Alberino. It actually sold out 2 days ago. It's a really popular wine from the Wine Society, and we're very proud of it. It's obviously our own label exhibition range. And to give members a heads up on the pairing, this is to go with sashimi. I've suggested salmon and white fish. Any of those, I've actually got one of each. I've got one white fish and one salmon to try. So if you are tasting along, then that's the pairing we're going for here. So the Society's Alberino. It's produced by a very reputable producer, Paso Señorans, and Paso actually stands for palace. It's the Galician word for palacio, and this is a beautiful big country manor, and actually they use it as a party venue. I didn't put a picture in because it made me too sad. But I actively encourage you, if you are ever in the region, to go and visit, because it's absolutely gorgeous. So Society's Alberino. Alberino is an indigenous grape found on the coast. So this particular part of Spain is, Vicky, the winemaker, actually says that it's like the UK because of the amount of rainfall that they receive in the UK. I think that's a bit unfair, but it is a very, very wet part of Spain. And it's the same grape variety as Albarino in Portugal. So if you tasted Vinho Verde, something like that, they are the same grape variety. But the style of the Spanish version is slightly different. It's a bit richer, a bit peachier. And they have to train it because of that cold wind. It comes right in off the Atlantic. It brings a little bit of disease alleviation, should we say, but because it's such a wet part of the country, they do actually grow all of their vines as pergolas. So incredible to look at. It's sort of like a corridor of vines. And they just raise those off the ground to get a bit more aeration and allow that wind to get rid of the disease pressure. So really, really beautiful place to visit. The nice thing about the cold breezes, it has this slow ripening effect for Albarino. So you can end up with a very, very flavorful wine, but actually not at a particularly high alcohol level. So you don't have to pick really early to retain the acidity as well. Long, slow growing period is very, very attractive for grape variety. The producers, so Paso Señorans, do own their own vines, but they also work with 200 small growers. So they'll have these contract growers and they mix that in with their estate fruit to produce around 350,000 bottles of wine per year. It's fermented in tank, and I think that's important to say because it just retains that freshness. It's definitely a stainless steel wine, and that crisp, sort of tart, underripe peach, something sometimes slightly floral as well. All of those are preserved beautifully because of those tanks. They do, however, keep it, they do hold the bottles back a bit before we launch. So this is our most recent vintage. It's not as if it goes straight out of the winery, and that supposedly adds some complexity as well. So 12.5%, I mentioned that lovely low, slow growing season and that crisp, bright refreshingness. For me, it's just the way to describe this wine is so clean. You know, it's a really, really good expression of Albarino. It's sort of, yeah, it's why it's our exhibition label, because it does exactly what it says on the tin and what Albarino for me should taste like. So if you are tasting along, have a taste. And Catherine has a bottle too. Catherine, have you tried it with the food yet?
I have. It's delicious. So I've got some salmon sashimi. So obviously that's quite like nice and rich, and they've sliced it quite thickly, which is nice as well because it gives a nice bit of texture. And the combination is great because it's that really lovely sort of oily, not quite unctuous, but it's got a lovely sort of mouth coating from the salmon, and then that acidity really cuts through and it's really refreshing and crisp. And it's a little bit like you get a little bit of a little bit of pepper in there, maybe like a little zippiness, which I think up the ante. I tried it with a bit of wasabi. That was slight bad idea. Dangerous. Because it was really up the ante. Lovely and crisp and refreshing.
Yeah, I think that's the nice thing, and you've sort of nailed exactly why I was hoping this pairing would be quite nice. That oily sashimi, and it is oily. There's no two ways about it. I've made the mistake of eating my sushi with my fingers this evening, and I can already feel it on my fingers. But what I love about having a whistle clean wine like this is it does just refresh the palate, and that's why, you know, it is a classic seafood wine. Albarino, it's a coastal wine, it's great with seafood, but for me, I needed to have the lovely high acidity, the freshness. I didn't want anything other than fruit and that kind of vibrancy to go with this. We're not going to do too much background on all the food this evening, members, but obviously sashimi is the raw fish. I think it could be all raw seafood actually, because you can get prawn sashimi as well, so it's not just fish. But sashimi being the raw part of the sushi platter, which personally I love, but obviously you have to get a good quality piece of fish, and there are different grades, so you can have sashimi grade fish. So I hope that the sashimi that you're enjoying this evening, members, is as punchy and flavoursome as mine is. But I think sashimi is just one of the most underrated, as long as the quality is good, it's just one of the most underrated parts of sushi. You know, you can add all the fancy bits and you can wrap the seaweed and make everything look pretty. But at the end of the day, a really, really good quality piece of sliced fish is pretty hard to beat. So we thought we'd start with a nice simple introduction. Is anybody, members at home, letting us know where you are or what you're drinking, or even whether you've got this pairing? So do let us know if you're trying it. We'd love to hear what you think. I don't know about you, Catherine, as well, but I find it quite hard to get really good quality sushi. I think we're sort of underserved in this country for excellent quality sushi.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, I think I perhaps mentioned it in the last food and wine thing we did when we were talking about that this was coming up. I've got a very good local Japanese restaurant, but they are tiny and they are very, very popular. So I just knew that a Friday night with this sort of weather, there was no chance that I was going to be able to get a delivery in time for this evening. So on my way home from work, I did a little stop off at a well-known high-end supermarket and sort of raided their fresh sushi counter, which I must admit, I think a lot of people, I'm glad with what I've got, but I think a lot of people also have the same idea of an easy dinner on a hot day like today. So it was slightly slim pickings, but no, I agree. I think it's something that we don't have a huge sort of access to it in the same way. And I think not to equate it necessarily to salad bars in the same way, but if you look at your average high street, there's often a lot of really great independent cafes and bakeries and things we can get. We're very carb focused in this country, aren't we? We can get a lot of excellent baked goods and excellent things that are a little bit more hearty. But when it comes to that sort of that fresher flavors, yes, David has identified the supermarket I went to. But when it comes to those fresher flavors, I think we don't have as much access, and it's a shame because it's such a lovely cuisine and it's such a great thing for a day like today.
I know, maybe that's it though. Maybe, Catherine, it's the weather. We don't have good enough weather to warrant several sushi chains. Oh, good. We've got a few more Waitrose sushis as well. Yeah, they do a pretty good sushi range. I'd say that's my go-to supermarket sushi for sure. Okay, so that was a lovely, refreshing, light introduction to the world of sushi, and now we're going to go to the stodgy end because we're going to go to the tempura. I don't think stodgy is the right way to describe tempura, and the best kind of oh, sorry, I forgot to show you the picture of what the perfect sashimi looks like. I don't think it's fair to say tempura is stodgy. The batter is made completely differently to other batters, so it is on the lighter end. But yes, I'm going to talk about the two wines members now. They are very similar in name, so just be aware. You may or may not know which one you're tasting because the names are so similar. The 2019 vintage of the Montlouis-sous-Loire Clos de Morny, which is the one I've got from Domaine de Tail au Loup. I'm going to talk about that one first. And I'm going to talk about in a moment, also from Montlouis. But that one, if you're tasting members, if you want to identify it very easily, has a picture of a sun on the label. So we're going to talk about the one without the sun first. So Montlouis-sur-Loire is a beautiful part of the Loire. It's very cool climate here. So again, we've got really nice acidity and freshness. And both of these wines are made from Chenin Blanc, which is naturally incredibly high in acidity. So again, I wanted to pick a wine for the tempura that can cut through that, again, slight oiliness in the batter. I've got prawn, but if you've got vegetable, it's a similar thing. I wanted that mouth coating, oiliness in the mouth. I wanted something to cut through that. So Chenin seemed a really obvious choice. This first wine actually is produced by a gentleman called Jackie Blanc. And as you can see here, actually, I don't think it is on here. I thought it was. Maybe it's in our notes behind that we get internally. But Jackie discovered wine when he was a junior pâtissier working at a restaurant in Paris when he was younger and hadn't really, found wine, fallen in love with wine. So he decided to go down the winemaking track and he acquired Domaine La Tail au Loup, and 20 years ago now, something like that. And then he's added another domain in Bourgogne called Domaine de la Butte. So he has two domains now. This particular wine, you'll notice it says Clos de Morny. Now, some of you members, I'm sure, will be aware, a clos is a walled vineyard. So all of this wine comes from that clos. It's completely walled. It's got a beautiful south-facing slope. So you're about to taste why I've told you that, because it does have this incredible ripeness in the mouth. And not all Chenins from the Loire have that, that ripeness. It is 100% Chenin Blanc, it has to be. 40 to 50-year-old vines, so quite old. And the soils are sandy clay with some silex, and then on a bed of pure limestone. They have, amazingly, 120 people pick for them for Taylor Loop. And the plot is only 6 hectares, this particular plot. And actually, they make another wine from this plot, but this is the second time they go through. So they've already gone through once and they've picked the lighter wine. This is the second time they go through. They've left some bunches on the vines. And again, I tell you that because it's got this ripeness, this real richness. It's indigenous yeasts, so a natural ferment, we could call it. No malolactic. So what that means is they've kept the malic acid rather than converting it to lactic acid. So by not putting the wine through malolactic conversion or fermentation, you retain that sort of more citrus and green apple type of acidity. And it's then fermented and aged. Well, sorry, it's already fermented, but it's aged in barrels. And 20% of those barrels are actually new. And I have to say the integration of the oak barrel in this wine for me it's absolute top level. So I'll have a quick taste and then we'll try it with the food. I'm getting lots of peaches, tangerine I got on both of these Chenions, which I think is lovely. It's got this almost not tropical by any stretch, but it's certainly a rich kind of citrus fruit. Slightly herbaceous, which I think is nice. And you are getting, we're going to use the buzzword again, Catherine, minerality. Let's not define that again tonight. We'll be here forever. But it has got this kind of flinty, sort of chalky nose to it. And a lot of the Loire wines that are grown on silex soils or silex soils have that kind of like smoky, stony sort of note. So I'm going to have a taste. It's just so rich. It's got such high acid, really fresh, but it's packed full of fruits. I do get more of that tangerine peel, satsuma, that sort of flavor, and this really, really ripe nectarine as well. Now, there's no sugar in this wine. There is a little bit of residual sugar in the next one, but it almost tastes like very, very warm cooked fruits, but still with this piercing acidity and a green apple skin for me on the finish, which is really delicious. So that's wine number 1. I'm going to taste it afterwards in a moment with the food, because I'll talk quickly about wine 2 first. Wine number 2, so from the same region, Montlouis-sur-Loire. And again, it's another Clos wine, so Clos Harbert this time. And it's made by Francois Chidin, who's sort of, how would I describe Francois? Sort of one of the greats of the Loire, and his wines are considered really at the top of their game. This wine's quite interesting. So it's grown on a high plateau, and so the Clos is sort of sat on this top spot, getting nice and cool. Doesn't have the slopes of the sunshine as the last wine did per se. It's only 3 hectares, so it's quite small, but the soils are quite similar. So you've got broken chalk, you've got clay. Obviously the Montlouis region is very famous for those soils. It's also similarly farmed, so it's organic and biodynamic. And the vines here are slightly different. So he trains the vines in Guyot and bush trained. And I have not come across that many bush trained Chenin in the Loire. But they're really old vines, 60 years old, so they're going to be packed full of concentration. They'll produce less fruit, but the fruit that they do produce will be really, really rich. Again, this is hand harvested, and again, it's with different passes or trees through the vineyard, and at a very low yield. So 30 hectolitres per hectare for this wine. So not much crop, but the crop that they do produce is very, very rich. It's worth noting, I actually was umming and ahhing about which of these wines to pick anyway. So I've got my wish, which is that I get to do both. Tempura has a slight sweetness to it, right? It's got particularly prawn tempura, which is naturally sweet. And then often the vegetables, the carrots and things that go into vegetable tempura, also sweet. So for a savory dish, particularly with sushi, I find, which has a lot of, Catherine's going to go on to talk about this in a bit, there are a lot of kind of umami flavors and things in sushi that we're going to move on to. but tempura for me has a bit of sweetness. And this wine has actually got 10 grams of residual sugar in it. And what that means is you could call it off dry, but Shidane actually prefers to call the wine sec tendre, gently dry. So he's halted fermentation and left that 10 grams. It's beautifully in balance with the rest of the wine. And then it's sat in a 600-litre, huge barrel for 6 months. So not imparting any flavour, but just allowing the wine to soften and settle. Again, I'm getting the tangerine thing. I don't know whether I've got tangerine on the brain, but for me, lots of tangerine, lemon peel, pear, also quite floral. And both of these wines had a hint of that classic Chenin beeswax as well. Yeah, I'm getting more. I've had this one open a while now, and I'm getting lots more of that kind of like honeysuckle floral thing on the nose, more so than was before. It's got it's got this kind of honeyed aroma, but it's not immediately they both smell quite honeyed, but this one is going to have the residual sugar in. So I'm going to give this one a taste now.
I agree, Anna. That beeswax, that was the first thing that pulled that out for me. So I've got the second wine, so the Clos Habert, so the one that has that little bit of residual sugar. And I've also got prawn tempura. So like you were saying, that in itself is that bit sweeter. But I was getting a bit of quince on there as well, and like the pear as well, that lovely sort of slightly waxy quince skin, that very perfumed sort of aromatic quality to it. And I tried my tempura with a little bit of pickled ginger. And then that really upped the ante with those lovely sort of perfumed aromatic notes coming through. And as well, also the ginger has that bit of sweetness, which really works nicely with a little bit of residual sugar in the wine.
Mm-hmm.
But still having the acidity to kind of get through the sort of oilier bit of the batter there. It's a really, really lovely pairing.
I'm going to be honest, before I'd sort of read about tempura being nice with slightly off dry wines or with Chenins that are rich, and I didn't know if it was definitely going to work. So when we were pulling this together, that was the one I was a bit like, oh, I'm a bit worried that might not work. And then when I tried it a few weeks ago, I thought, no, that is fantastic. I'm never not going to have Chenin I'm not going to have tempura with anything other than Chenin now, I don't think. It is worth as well, members, if you've still got some Alberino left, it's worth trying the Alberino with the tempura. And I say that because fried fish, coastal fried fish is a popular, you would have Alberino with, say, a plate of small fried sardines or something. So they kind of work together in a different sort of way. I just find the batter on the tempura is that tiny bit sweeter. So for me, it needed something slightly richer and sweeter. It's also worth mentioning, I think Julia Shaw says that she has a bottle of Clos de Mosny in the garage, but won't be opening it up for a while. She would be interested to hear how it's drinking at the moment. It's worth saying that both of these wines, the two Chenins, will age. So they'll go for a really lovely long time. And particularly with that touch of sweetness in the second wine, you could easily be looking at 30 years if you really did want to age it. And it will just develop even more honeyed characters. Both of them will. Sometimes slightly nutty, but those beeswax and honey characters will really start upping if you do age those wines. Personally, probably would not go as well with the pairing being slightly older for me, because the acid will mellow slightly. There's no science behind that, I don't think, but everybody sort of says that the acidity, our perceived acidity, drops as wines age. So for me, I think drinking them younger with this food is correct, but my goodness, I would have either of those wines with a hearty chicken pie in 10, 15, 20 years as well. So yes, worth mentioning that they do age.
Absolutely. And again, Julia, we've had a couple of comments as well about how a slightly off dry Chenin or a demi-sec Chenin is one of the best sort of pairings of food. It's got that versatility, and I think that's absolutely spot on. It's something that really crosses all sort of bases.
Yeah, and for 10 grams per litre, it's not sweet. 10 grams per litre, you can get extra brut sparkling wine, I think, at 10 grams per litre. It's in balance. So it's not that it's, for members who aren't trying it, it's not that it's a sweet, it's not nowhere near a dessert wine, you know, in 100 plus grams per litre. It's just got this lovely kind of honeyed fruits to it, rather than being actually sugary. So, oh yeah, tempura and Chenin Blanc is my new favorite thing. I think I've got a picture of a tempura, but bear with me. Should you wish to see pictures of tempura? I don't know, maybe you do. So Catherine, you're up next, and I'm really excited to share these.
I am. Wonderful. So, I mean, I must say to start with, members, I don't think it would necessarily be one of our food and wine pairing evenings if I didn't try and get a rosé and a sherry into it in some form. So I'm very pleased to be talking about these tonight. And we do have, similar to the Chenin, we've got 2 rosés that we recommended because the first one proved very popular and was unfortunately out of stock. And I think as well, with the lovely weather, rosé is just, I'm very much a believer of rosé for all seasons, but there's no denying that when the sun comes out, everyone also turns to rosé. So we've got the Brindisi Risotto, the Vigna Flaminio Valoni 2021. So I think, Anna, that's what you've got, both of them. Perfect. So you can, it is a wine I know well, because I find it really great value and I really enjoy it. So I don't have it this evening, but I've got the second one, which is the Basilicata Risotto Laurel. It's an Alberino 2021. So I'll talk a bit about both of them. But before I go into a bit more detail about the wines in their sort of specific production and the differences between them, the first thing that I would say is that both of them are quite deeply coloured. They're both Southern Italian rosés. They are deeply coloured. If you are perhaps a little bit hesitant with a rosé, and particularly hesitant on the sort of dryness or sweetness of your rosés, don't be put off by the colour. These are both dry rosés, and they are very gutsy and they've got a lot going for them. And that is what I wanted with this pairing. So this is to pair with the spicy vegetable sort of uramaki. So the sort of rice rolls with all manner of lovely fresh crisp vegetables in there, so carrot, cucumber, maybe some avocado, but also with a lovely bit of spice on it. Now, I wasn't able to find the spicy ones, so I've just gone a bit ham with a bit of sriracha on top, so I can get that lovely spicy qualities coming through. And you need a gutsy rosé or a gutsy wine in general to pair up with that and to balance that sort of depth with depth, and the power with power. Although maybe let's not talk about balancing powers at the moment. Maybe it's not too topical for the current news, but let's turn back to sushi. So these are both lovely, lovely, bright red, crunchy fruits, very ripe from being down in the south of Italy, both 2021 vintage. So again, really nice year. In fact, in their regions, almost a little bit of a worry at times because it was very hot, but we've got some really lovely fruit. And again, they both have a lovely, fresh, crisp acidity as well. I've said it time and time again, and it's something I will do to death, but rosé is such a great wine for food pairing. You've got that lovely freshness and the crispness of a white, but you've got the depth and the intensity that you would get with a red wine. So it really covers off a lot of strong flavour pairings. So the first one is the Brindisi Risotto. It's the Vigna Flaminio. And this is from down in Puglia, so right in that sort of boot of Italy, if you're picturing a map. It's got that lovely red berry, some really nice crunchy cranberry and red currant on there, a little bit of raspberry as well, which has got a little bit of that perception of sweetness from the ripeness of the fruit, which is really nice at tempering against the spicy elements in the sushi. But it's also got that lovely tartness that you get with those sort of fruits, those really crisp red berries. It's not too much of that soft, delicate, almost damsony red fruit. It's really biting. It's a really good match with seafood as well. So if you have got some of the other sushi sort of dishes to hand, do try with those. But I've chosen it to go with the vegetable sushi because it also has a really lovely sort of herby quality to both of the wines. But in the Brindis in particular, it's got a lovely sort of it's not quite a woody herb. It's like a fresh sort of, I think there's a little bit of a sagey note to it. It's a lovely savory, sort of oily herb. You know, if you rub a bit of sage in your fingers and you've got that lovely perfume to it. Anna, I can see you're nodding away there.
I think tarragon as well, Catherine. I've got a bit of tarragon. There's really lovely aromatic herbs.
Yeah, there's really fresh and beautiful and perfumed, almost like the sort of herbs that you would use to garnish a drink if you were making sort of a cocktail, those lovely sort of oily and perfumed herbs. So in terms of where it is from, the producer is Agricole Vallone. They are based down in the Salento Peninsula in Puglia, so right down in the heel by the sea. They've got the Adriatic cooling across the vineyards, so it is nice and hot and warm and great for ripening, but they've also got those tempering factors from the proximity to the sea. They've got about 170 hectares of vines that are interspersed with other crops, so they've got olives, artichokes, vegetables. Whether that actually has an impact on the flavor of the vines, perhaps the olive trees, they often have a bit of that sort of olivey tapenade perfume coming off them in the same way that we've spoken about the aromatic herbs. Whether that's something that imparts particularly into the grapes because of them being grown close together is a little bit debatable, but the fact that they are down and being grown with those sort of other crops, it also just does enhance the perception of those sort of flavors within the wine. I know there's some curious thinking.
Sorry, I just muted myself. I have to say the nose on this wine, when we just opened it earlier and I put my nose in it and I thought, why don't I buy more of this wine? It has got the most fragrant nose. And like you say, it's this lovely sort of light herbs, fruit. It just absolutely leaps out of the glass and it's a lot of aroma for a £9 wine.
Absolutely. And I would say as well with this one, not that tomato particularly features heavily in sushi that I've ever sort of come across, but this is a great tomato-based dish pairing. So tomato salads, it's got that tomato leaf, herby aromatic quality to it as well. So it's really a lot of flavor, a lot of oomph. Members, if you are drinking it as well, if this is the one you have, do let us know what you think. Agricole Vallone, they were founded in 1934, and they used to sell their grapes to a local cooperative. It was only in the late 90s that they decided to bottle their own wines, and then they became quite a name with their flagship wine, which is the Grataccia, which is the barrel-aged red, which you may be familiar with, which was also made with the Negro Amaro grape, which is what this one is made from. And it has a really, the Flaminio label of this wine is the label that they've chosen to use for the wines they produce that are varietal wines. So it's 100% Negro Amaro. All the grapes are the same variety. It comes from vineyards on the company estates, and they want it to show the varietal definition to it. Oh, that's a good question, Nadia, about the best temperature to drink the Brindisi Risotto. So in terms of, I would take it out of the fridge maybe 15-20 minutes before you are wanting to enjoy it, to let it come up to temperature a little bit. So maybe around that 11-12 degrees sort of temperature.
If you're drinking in the garden, I'd say straight out the fridge today. It would heat up right
on
away.
A day like today. Absolutely. Particularly as well, depending on your glass. If you've got a stemless glass and you're holding it in a hot palm, absolutely have it straight from the fridge. But as with all wines, if you have them come up a little bit to temperature, you will get a little bit more from the aromatics. And it does have the acidity that it will stay nice and fresh, but when it's hot weather, I don't think there's anything more disappointing than a wine that is starting to go on to a slightly sour because it's getting a little bit warm. So nice and cold, but maybe take it out 10 minutes and let it come up ever so slightly, because the colder it is, the slightly duller the flavors will be. In terms of the soil for the vines here, they are calcareous and clay. So they've got drainage when they need it, but they've also got the ability to retain water. So in these hot years, like 2021, it keeps that freshness there. It keeps it, keeps the vines from having too much stress, because a nice bit of stress is good for the vines. It means they can concentrate their efforts into the grape growing, but too much stress means they have a bit of a panic and nothing good comes from it. So in terms of the production, they hand harvest to make sure they have all the really healthy grapes. And then they have a fermentation in steel tanks. So again, that retains the acidity, it retains the freshness of the fruit. And then they'll let it go on the fine lees for 3 months. Now, if you have this wine, hopefully, again, it's a little bit like minerality. Texture is one of those things that come up quite a lot in wine, but hopefully you'll see it's got a little bit of that texture to it, a little bit of a mouthfeel, a little bit of a mealy character to it. So it's got a lot of that lovely primary fruit, but there's a little bit more and it lingers a little bit more. And I think the spicy sushi also has a little bit of a sesame seed sprinkle on it. So that sort of cereally note goes really nicely with that leesy quality. And also the yeasts in general from lees have that lovely sort of bready, like doughy flavor, which I'll come on to more when we go on to the sherry. But if you think about things that are used within the sushi making practice, so things like mirin, or if you think of having sake with your sushi as an alternate wine, you've also got that flavor profile of that savory umami character. So those lees aging elements really do add a little bit more depth to that wine. It then has a little bit more time back in steel once it's filtered off the lees, again, just so that it doesn't lose any freshness before it is bottled and then goes to market.
Catherine, I tried it with the salmon sashimi, and it was absolutely delicious with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think
so good.
I would be hard to convince to say it wouldn't go with all of the dishes. I don't want to, be too bold and say that it could be, the rosé could be the most pairing, but actually I think all of them could. That's what's so great. There's so many similarities within these flavors of sushi and the different options that we've chosen and recommended this evening, that all of these wines have such great qualities, and they all have that acidity that runs through it, and that structure of the wine really makes it a lovely fresh pairing. So the next rosé that we've got is the Basilicata Risotto Laurel. It's an Alberino 2021. Now this is also from the south of Italy, again down near Puglia. It's from the Basilicata IGT, which is the Indicazione Geografica Tipica, and the title for the Basilicata region. And Aglianico is the grape here that is sort of dominates. So this is again another indigenous variety, so it's 100% Aglianico, and this one is that it's that little bit more intense in color in comparison to the Brindisi. And where the vines for this one are, they are surrounded by sort of mountains and forests, so a little bit more inland, and because of that, I think, well, not because of it, but because you've got that foresty, piney influence, there is a little bit more on the woody herb nose on this wine. There's a bit more in terms of sort of rosemary on there for me, a little bit of that, not quite pine, but slightly resinous. You can smell that it's savory, which feels like an odd thing to say, but even just smelling it, my mouth is watering. So I know that it's got that savory sort of umami, really sort of lovely mouthfeel, richness to it. Basilicata as a region it's down, obviously down in the south, but in terms of its history, it's had the cultivation of vines there that have dated right back into sort of 1300 BC. It was talked about by Pliny the Elder. Horace as well made comments on the vines from there. So it's got a real long history and establishment of a wine producing area. Now, I'm not saying that the vines for this wine date back to Pliny the Elder, but the fact that it has that history, and the vines in general do have a long established time in the vineyards, and that does also then mean that you've got an increase in the concentration and the complexity. So this is produced by Alberino. They are a winery that was founded by Oronzo Allo, and they really want to produce wines that show the region at its best, show the intensity that they can produce, the concentration. Again, you've got some really lovely, bright, crunchy red fruit. It's more intense in this one, I would say, and a little bit more of the savory character and the herby notes. The cellars are technologically advanced. They have thermo-conditioning, which is a great move because it does mean that they keep the coolness in the production of the wine. So it is a lovely and fresh, and again, it has that acidity. In 2003, they put in some optimal storage of the wines as well. And they've turned over their vineyards to have a bit more of an enhancement on the vines, and really spent a bit of time putting a bit more into the land to get more out from it. Now, this one, for me, is a little bit more of a slightly better pairing with the spicier element of this dish, because it is that little bit more intense and a little bit more concentrated. Anna, I don't know if you would agree, as you've got both to hand.
Yeah, I think I actually really like both pairings. I think I probably prefer the wine, the Negro Amaro by itself, as in when I tasted them just side by side before the food. I think I preferred the Negro Amaro. But I do agree, this extra guts is very helpful. What I would say as well, we were just talking about temperature. When I first tasted these wines straight out the fridge when we were setting up, I didn't get as much on the nose, I'll be honest, on this wine. And now, having come back to it 45 minutes later, it's really shining now. It's really, all of those kind of cherry, strawberry, all of that, but underlying this, like you say, very herb base. Kind of, yeah, I get your pine resin thing, but I know what you're saying. It's kind of like wood. It's woody, isn't it?
It is woody.
It smells like walking through a forest. Yeah. And I didn't get that when I first opened it, when it was straight out the fridge. So if there were ever a reason to, we've proved the experiment, Catherine. Basically, this is a wine that definitely could do with opening up and warming up a little in the glass. No, great pairings. I like them very much. The other thing I would mention, actually, this is quite strange, and that's why I just check the alcohol levels, because alcohol obviously tends to like increase spice.
Yeah.
I actually found the spicier with the Negro Amaro wine, and I didn't. This actually lower in alcohol, so I don't know why, but I found that the spice got really exacerbated with this wine, and less so with the second.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is a proven thing, but I don't know if, because of the concentration in the Alberino, maybe that's something that in my mind and my palate is concentrating so much on the concentration of the fruit and those fruit flavors that actually I'm almost ignoring the spice a little bit, whereas the Brindisi is that little bit less in concentration, so the spice takes dominance.
Yeah, I know what you mean. That lightness means that the spice almost shines the spice overpowers almost slightly. Not a good pairing, but in terms of that power play you spoke about, Catherine.
Absolutely. Nadia's just asked about whether the Basilicata rosé would go well with tomato-based dishes too. Absolutely. I think we often say, in terms of sort of food and wine pairing, that what grows together goes together, and that can be very true, and it can also limit you. But I think in this instance, it is one of the ones that is more true. It does have that lovely acidity, and often tomato-based dishes have a lot of acidity too. If you're perhaps putting things like mascarpone in there or anything else that adds a bit of creamy temperance to the acidity, it's not so much of a worry. But if it is straight tomato-based, that acidity can be a concern. So you need the acidity and you need the intensity of flavour. And I think because you've got that lovely savoury note as well, that herbal note, tomato-based dishes, and if you think of the scent of a tomato leaf, that goes lovely hand in hand. What's quite an interesting thing in terms of food and wine pairing and the way we talk about aromatics in wine and different flavours is, at the Wine Society, we've actually started growing some tomato plants as a little project in one of our areas of a walkway in a building that gets a lot of warmth. And it does mean that I do know now exactly what a tomato leaf smells like. I think always before I was like, oh yeah, a little bit like tomato, a little bit like a leaf, but now I know exactly. And I would say absolutely, it's got that lovely perfumed tomatoey herby character that is also prevalent in these rosés, in the Basilicata, in the Brindisi. So absolutely perfect pairing for anything tomato based.
Julian's just said that he agrees all three wines that he's got go well with the range of sushi, sashimi, and the tempura.
Wonderful.
So there we go.
Lovely. So
I'm almost sad to go on to the Fino, and it means we've whistled through them, Catherine, but I'm so excited.
It is a lovely Fino, and the bottle does look a little bit like a beer rather than a sherry. So, but I don't think you could get by with just swigging this one from the bottle. I absolutely wouldn't recommend you just have a swig of this one, but it is delicious. So pour a good measure if you have it to hand, members, if you're trying this one with us.
Fridays are for Fino.
Absolutely. Oh, it's beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful and intense. Now, I won't go too much into the differences between sherries. I won't be going through the entire Solera system of the sort of fractional aging, but I will talk about the fact that being a Fino, it has biological aging. So that means that when it is in production, the aging of it is under a layer of flor. And a flor is the yeast, and that protects it from any oxygen getting in. So it keeps it lovely and fresh and bready and nutty. There's a little bit of a green almond note to it, so a very ripe almond or some very ripe fresh nuts, white nuts particularly. So even some sort of hazelnuts or perhaps a little bit of a cashew as well. And it's got that really lovely crisp citrus and green fruit. So particularly sort of that tart green apple. Really, really crisp, lovely lemon, preserved lemon. It doesn't smell salty. That's something that my brain is just telling me it smells, but it has a little bit of a, when you taste it, you'll get that lovely salty, savory tang. But it does have that smell of a seaside, a crisp apple.
Just about to say
in sea spray. Absolutely. So obviously, not obviously, but perhaps if you're near the sea, you expect fish. And tuna is what we have gone with for this pairing. Now, tuna can be quite intense a flavour depending on the cut that you get and the how premium your tuna is. But it also has a sort of delicacy to the texture and a a softness almost. It can be quite melting in the mouth. It's oily still like salmon, but I think for me, it's not as meaty in texture. I don't know if it's the sort of the fibrous structure of the meat itself. David's saying that the manzanilla is going very well with the tuna. I bet that would. Again, that's a lovely biological aged sherry, so it does have those lovely similarities in flavour. And it's something that, for me, it acts like that lovely spritz of lemon over your fish. And what's also really noticeable for me is that it has that lovely bready, cereally, mealy character, not dissimilar to mirin or the rice itself, or any sesame seeds that you might have on there. So it's a really lovely balance and just enhancement of the flavors that are already there. I think it's a really, really great pairing, and particularly if you have if you've decided to kind of dip it in a little bit of soy sauce. So you've got that lovely salty hit from the soy sauce. So you also want to balance it with that lovely savory tang from your wine or from the sherry in this respect. It is the Innocente Fino from Valdaspino, and it's a half bottle, which is a really nice, convenient little, let's say single serve for the weekend. But it's really nice and keeps nice and fresh, because Fino is a sherry that you should sort of treat in the way you would a white wine. So it's not going to be able to sit in a decanter forever, particularly because it is biologically aged. It gets a little bit of oxygen on it, and it will act in the same way as a normal white wine. So you want to be drinking it while it's nice and fresh and chilled. So keep it in the fridge. It is a classic style Fino. It's very intense and nutty. It's got those lovely bready, appley notes. It was the winner of the IWC Fino Trophy in 2021. And I can understand why, because I think it is a really, really knockout one. Valdaspino is one of the oldest bodegas in the sherry region. The first commercial activities can be found recorded as dating back to the year 1430. And it was in 1875, so the year after our creation, that the firm was made into a limited company, and it remained in family hands until 1999, when it was acquired by the Jose Estevez Group. It represents the sort of perfect harmony between artisan production and then modern and slightly more sensitive techniques to really show the style of wine at its best. Thanks to the history of the quality production, it really does stand out as a benchmark amongst the sherry region and producers. And what they do in terms of their fermentation is actually to use old, well-seasoned American oak butts of 500 litres. So the norm nowadays in Fino production is to go with stainless steel. So that reverts back to the sort of things we were talking about in terms of keeping the acidity and the freshness. They've decided to use the old oak, American oak at that, and that lovely age to it means that it's got a bit more going for it. It can add, again, some texture to the wine. The size of it means that it has a lot of sort of space. So while it's still under that layer of floor, so it protects it from any oxygen, it does mean that a very tiny amount will pop in and just add a little bit of oomph to the wine without removing any of the freshness to it. The grapes are grown obviously very close to the production area. So it's in the Machonado vineyard. And the key thing, which you may be aware of with any sort of sherries, is the Alberino soil. So those are the lovely white stones that you get in the Jerez region. And that soil and the white soil and the big stones mean that the sun can really beat down and get reflected back into the grapes, so it will ripen really well. It will retain the heat, so it can continue ripening throughout the day and throughout the nights when it can go a little bit cooler. And it means that those grapes are really fresh and ripe, and at their optimum quality for when it comes to harvest. The rainfall in the sherry region is quite high in comparative terms to Spain. It's got around an average of 600 litres a year. And it's concentrated typically, I mean, Mother Nature works in amazing ways, but it typically concentrates to the end of harvest and the start of the grape formation. So it's actually in the optimum time for the vines to receive that influx of water. It means that the moisture is stored in the depths of the soils, and it means there's more of a regulated water supply to the roots. So how that works, whether it's magic or science, is to be debated, but it does work and it benefits the grapes amazingly. It's just really fresh and zippy and tangy and bright. I think.
Do you know what else I love, Catherine? I think this is such a clever pairing, because my maki roll, I actually was a bit naughty and I'd already nibbled some of it. But the seaweed around my maki roll is very strong. And that is genius, because you've got that like very, very salty seaweed wrapped around it. And the salty nature of the Fino is just a marriage. It's absolutely inspired. And I think the other thing is, I know you were mentioning you were going to talk a bit about umami, but tuna can have that slightly umami flavor to it too. So I think all of those things going together.
Absolutely. And so umami is sort of considered perhaps like the sixth sense, the sixth on your tongue. So you've got, and it is a savory perception. So things like soy sauce has the umami there, mushrooms have a lot of umami, some green vegetables have a lot of umami, and then you've got that lovely savory yeast extract, so your Marmites, Vegemites, it's got that really lovely richness and tanginess, and I think this has it in bounds. Nadia's asked whether it would go well with seared tuna steaks. Absolutely it would. That is actually one of our sort of recommended things to pair with this Fino. I think on our website, seared tuna is absolutely the one, and it's actually what made me consider it to start with. I was already thinking sort of a Fino Manzanilla with sushi because of the things that we've talked about, that salty element, but the fact that then this said great with seared tuna, I was like, oh, absolutely, I'll try that, and it works. So absolutely, Nadia, a little bit of seasoning on the tuna, not too much, let it do its own thing, sear them so it's got that lovely texture, and that would be a beautiful pairing.
Yeah, I'm just sad I don't have any soy sauce with me here. I'm going to pour myself another Fino after this and go and get some soy sauce, because I think that as well, I haven't got it in front of me, but I'm imagining that sort of umami from the soy sauce, etc., would be really beautiful. And I think also it's worth saying that tuna does have a touch of sweetness, perhaps less so than salmon. But yeah, that sweetness, I think, as well, is it's quite complex, so you've got a lot going on in a very small little maki roll. So you need something complex like a Fino.
Absolutely. And then it plays into that sort of salty sweet partnership as well, that is such a popular food flavor.
Sorry, I thought we'd lost you, Catherine, but you're back. Yeah, no, I think I'm going to be honest. I will hold my hand up. I think that's my favourite pairing of the evening. Well done, Catherine. I'd have never done it before, and now again, I'm most devastated because my husband doesn't really like sherry. So I think that little bottle there is the perfect Anna-sized bottle. Absolutely. And I'll just keep that in my fridge. Yeah. Members, do you have any more questions for Catherine or I? I'm hoping that people have been quiet on the chat because they've been enjoying some nice food and wine this evening. So I hope that we haven't missed anybody or anybody's questions. I'm just going to have a quick scroll back through, but I have been trying to keep an eye.
And remember, if you've been trying the pairings, do let us know what might be your favourites. Not that it's a competition, all wines are treated equal in these events, but it's nice to see what people think.
Absolutely.
I think for me, I would actually go with the this makes it sound like a really big surprise, but I would go with the Loire in the slightly sweet one, because I think across the board it's going so well with everything. It's got a little bit of every quality I want for each dish it's paired with. So for me, it's the Clos Herbert.
Nice. And yeah, I can't remember who it was in the chat said something about those off dry or tendre sec tendre wines are really good food wines. And they're just not in vogue at the moment. They're a bit less fashionable.
Yeah.
When you hear off dry, you assume it's going to be very, very sweet, whereas actually this is only 10 grams per litre in this one. So I think off dry can put people off. There's a slew of very poorly made, slightly sweet wines in this world. And that's not one of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I can understand why it's off-putting, because you don't know. And until you try one, then how would you know? So yeah, the tendre sec for me was very, very good.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Lovely. So Julian's decided not to open the Fino, something to look forward to later. Interesting to see whether anything goes with the cheese left from Wednesday's Greek evening.
Oh,
Catherine, you're best placed to answer this one.
Yeah, so I would say, I think, Julian, you've perhaps hit it on the head there with the Chenin, if it is the slightly sweeter one. But also I would say either of the rosés as well, because one of the cheeses that we had, members, was a sort of firmer sheep's cheese, but it had some smoked thyme on it, so that lovely herby character.
Yeah.
So perhaps the rosé as well would be a nice one to try. Well done, Julian, for having cheese left. I didn't do as well.
I've heard the cheese was flying off the shelves. Nobody had any left.
No, it was very good cheese.
Oh, well, thank you, members, for joining. Thank you so much for sharing your Friday evening with us. It's a pleasure, as always. Julia said Anna and Catherine, the perfect pairing. We do love our Friday night takeaways, so yes, we will have more. There's a couple in the plan already for the rest of the year, and we'll try and squeeze one or two more in as well. And then we'll have all of our lovely events later in the year, lots of foodie things to come. So thank you again, and thank you, Catherine, for an inspired sherry and sushi pairing, which has blown my mind, and I'll never look back again.
Thank you, Anna, for your delicious pairings. I've actually got the Japanese restaurant I was talking about, I am going to in a few weeks, so I'm hunting out some bottles to take with me. So I think this has made up my mind. So thank you, Anna, for helping me with my research.
Happy to oblige, Catherine. Thank you all, members, and hopefully see you soon.
Cheers, everyone.